Welcome to the Human Flourishing Project. I'm Alex Epstein. I'm recording this episode a little bit late, so you're going to get it on Monday instead of Sunday. Sorry about that, but hopefully it is a valuable topic for you. It's definitely a valuable topic for me. So today's topic is avoiding overwhelm. And it's going to be a pretty quick episode, but I think I have a high-level perspective on this that's been helpful to me and may well be helpful to you. So let me first define overwhelm. Now, there's actually some controversy over whether this is a noun or it can be a legitimate noun because it's traditionally a verb in terms of, I'm going to overwhelm in a fight or something. I could overwhelm my opponent. But I like overwhelm as a noun as well, because it captures something that I think a lot of us are familiar with. And so here's how I define it. The feeling that one has way more to do than time to do it. So the feeling, overwhelm, the feeling that one has way more to do than time to do it. It's not a formal definition that I would necessarily put in a dictionary, but I think it captures a lot. Now, if you've never experienced this, then I want to learn from you, although maybe if you've never experienced it, then sometimes people have no overwhelm because they have no goals, although I don't know how common that is. I think a lot of people experience overwhelm in different kinds of forms, and I have three things that I think are key to avoiding it. But first, let me talk about just why it's so desirable to avoid, and then also how it's desirable to achieve the positive. And I don't know of any good word or even short expression for the opposite of overwhelm, because it's not underwhelm. That's in the verb context. But the shortest thing I can think of is being on top of life, or someone once described it to me as surfing on top of life, but I'll use being on top of life. And that's the feeling that, well, I have the time I need to do what I want, and all of my commitments are under control. And that's a very good feeling. It's just, and let me do it in contrast actually to overwhelm, because I think that's the more relatable thing. So just think about, if we're feeling overwhelmed, it can undercut just about any experience. And that's really a serious thing, but it's definitely true with overwhelm. So if we're feeling overwhelmed, think about relaxation. Relaxation is way harder when we're feeling overwhelmed, because it can be hard to stop thinking about the things that we feel overwhelmed by. Whereas when we're on top of life, we can relax fully because we know everything is under control. And so I can just enjoy, say, lying down on the beach, and it's that expression, without a care in the world. And that's a really fun state. And then the overwhelmed state is not a fun state. Or you think about personal relationships. When one is preoccupied with what one is overwhelmed by, that seeps into personal relationships. So whether it's romantic partner or kids or friendships, it makes it harder to enjoy those and to be fully engaged in those. And then with the work itself. So usually, although not always, the source of overwhelm is work related. And if I feel like I have a work day and I just feel I have way too much to do, that undercuts the enjoyment I'm going to get from anything. I mean, it feels more like, okay, I did this and now I'm not drowning quite as much, versus, I'm on top of this. I get to do this. I get to do this. I get to do this. And having a positive feeling of accomplishment and just having a level of relaxation throughout. And if you've heard previous episodes of this show, I talk a lot about relaxed productivity. And I think one of the keys to relaxed productivity is feeling on top of life, including being on top of one's work, or feeling on top of one's work, rather than feeling overwhelmed by it. So, how to avoid overwhelm? Well, it's not a comprehensive list, but I'm going to focus on three things, and I'll say them and then I'll elaborate on them. So number one is to time block work. Number two is to choose projects carefully. And number three, which I may focus the most time on, is to scope projects carefully. So to time block work, to choose projects carefully, and to scope projects carefully. Let's start out with time blocking work. And this is something I've covered on many previous episodes, so I won't go too much into it. But the basic idea of time blocking is that you decide how much of your life is going to go to how much, and really what percentage of your time is going to go to different kinds of activities in your life. So broadly speaking, it can be work, it can be different personal relationships, it can be recreation, rejuvenation. You can, but whatever it is, it's that the categories have limits on them. So you think about, okay, I'm going to work whatever it is, 50 hours a week. That's what I'm going to do. And why is this helpful to avoiding overwhelm? Well, in part because it contributes to the other two, which is choosing projects carefully and scoping projects carefully. But it reinforces the idea that, okay, this is part of my life. It has a specific amount of time allocated to it, and I will not, and I can't do more. I can only do a certain amount of work. And what happens when one doesn't time block, so let's just say it's, any time I could theoretically be doing work, it easily leads to overcommitment and also to guilt, which is quite closely tied to overwhelm. By the way, if you hear any slight background noise, I apologize for that. My computer is having some sort of weird issue, so hopefully you're not hearing it, but if you do, I'm aware of it and we'll fix it for next time. So continuing with time blocking work. When time blocking is going really well, there's a real serenity about, okay, this is the time when I do my work, and this is the time when I do other things, and there's not a solution of during the other times, there's not a guilt of, I need to be doing work, because no, that's not a solution to feeling overwhelmed. You can make exceptions in certain weeks. Nobody's commanding you to do anything, but when you're time blocking, you're really appreciating, okay, I want to spend certain amounts of time on my life, time in my life on different things, no more, no less. And that's what I'm going to do. And so when you have that really clear, then if you're at the beach, then what you're supposed to be doing is being at the beach. That's very clear just from time blocking your life. You've made that decision in advance. When you're at the beach, you're not supposed to be doing work. So if you're feeling overwhelmed with work, the solution is within the work time. It's not outside the work time. And that brings us to choosing projects carefully and scoping projects carefully. So choosing projects carefully. There's an expression that I heard. I learned it from a guy named Tal Tzfani, who's the CEO of the Ayn Rand Institute, and I forget, he learned it from someone else, but he told it to me, and I think about it all the time. And there's no such thing as a small project. There's no such thing as a small project. So the easiest way to get overwhelmed is to take on too many projects, and projects are exciting sometimes, especially if we like the kinds of work we're doing, or we like the kind of result that can come from doing work. It's easy to say, oh yeah, I'll do this and I'll do this and I'll do this. And there are all sorts of dynamics playing toward this, including, if somebody's asking us to do something, it can feel nice to say, oh yes, and it's helpful, and you can see in the moment, oh, it's valuable. If I look at this thing of this person, that'll be valuable. But there's really no such thing as a small project. And even beyond that, every project and every activity takes time, and time is scarce. So one just really has to think about what projects am I committing to and why. And the time blocking helps a lot with this, because if it's, okay, I'm working 50 hours a week, does this go into my 50 hours a week. And now sometimes you can cheat, at least I do, in terms of, if somebody wants me to look at an essay and it's not really part of my work and I think it'll be fun, then I'll say, okay, I'll put that on some of my recreational time because I don't have any real obligation involved with it. It's not the same thing as completing my own book or completing some other work type activity. So you can do that kind of thing depending on the nature of the projects you're thinking about. But in terms of the core projects in your work, everything is competing with everything else for time. And so that it's really, really important to just say, okay, I'm going to choose this project carefully in the context of all of my other projects, and have as the default to not do new projects. I mean, it depends. If you're working for a boss, then it's a different kind of dynamic, but then they have to be aware of this, and you have to be aware of this even in communicating with the boss of what kinds of projects you're going to do. And part of choosing them carefully is choosing the deadlines carefully. This is going to connect to scope, which I'll talk about in a minute, but there's just has to be a recognition that I only have so much time to do work. And so I want to choose the projects that are going to most achieve my goals. And that necessarily means not doing a lot of projects that are appealing. And here, Steve Jobs, as in many places, is a good guide. And there's a great video by Johnny Ive, Steve, the longtime head designer at Apple, who recently left being full-time. But there's an interview, if you search Johnny Ive, Jony space IVE, Vanity Fair, there's a 3-minute clip where he talks about Steve Jobs and focus, and the idea, I forget if I've mentioned this on a previous episode, but that focus means saying no to things. And in particular, it means saying no to something that you think with every bone in your body is a great idea. And I've really found this in the last year, where there's so many things I think, oh yeah, this is so important, particularly with everything going on in the world. I really want to comment on this. It would be so good if I could write this article or say this thing. And then I have to decide, okay, but I only have so much time. What do I actually want to do? I need to choose my projects carefully. And the default has to be no, in part because if I have a number one project, anything I do in addition to that is at least slowing down the number one project. That's almost always true. Sometimes they can be complementary, as in, this is somewhat true with writing. You can only do so much writing in a day. And so then you might want other projects, and sometimes they'll have this that are easier to do. Like I can do writing and giving speeches pretty well, and the giving speeches doesn't interfere that much with the writing, at least if it doesn't go beyond a certain point. But the default is everything is competing with the completion time and or quality of my number one project, because the more time you can allocate to something more quickly, the more quickly you can get it done at higher quality. Now, it doesn't mean you only do one project. I have multiple projects going on, and I try to think about that and evaluate that a lot and decide, okay, do I want to keep doing this? That there are reasons why I want to keep doing things, but those decisions have to be made with full awareness. And so when I think about, in my own case, I've been working on a book, the second version of The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, and I'm deliberately delaying that date by doing other projects. Particularly, I have a political project I've been doing, which is, you can see at energytalkingpoints.com, where I'm creating messaging that candidates and citizens can use this year. And for various reasons, I thought that was a very important project, but it does somewhat come at the expense of completing the book on a given timetable. And then I have a startup that I'm involved with, which I've talked about on a previous episode, Thoughtful. And that also competes. But I've decided, okay, well, this is really worthwhile. I have long-term goals related to this. This is something I want to work on. I want to be involved in this for a long time in various capacities. And then with Human Flourishing Project, what you're listening to right now, that's another thing where I find it valuable for my own life, but I also find it valuable as generating material that I can use to write with. And I think of myself primarily as a writer in terms of my content creation. So I think I will do a book at some point in the not too distant future on relaxed productivity. And a lot of those themes I've developed on this show, and that'll help a lot with the book. And one reason why I focus a lot on relaxed productivity on this show is because I want to write about that. Also because also because it's a lot of what I think about in my own life. And then this leads to scoping projects carefully, because as I'm talking about choosing the projects carefully, part of that is scoping them carefully. And I'll start off with Human Flourishing Project. It's okay, I have to decide what is the scope of what I'm doing. And it could be something as simple as, well, how many days a week do I do it? With what frequency do I do it? So I do it every 2 weeks. It can be things like, okay, do I have a major promotional goal with it? Am I trying to get it to be incredibly popular and to get paid for it? Right now, no, I'm not focused on that. And if I focused on that, that would be a bigger scope. And I may well do that in the future, but for now, that's not my focus at all. Now, part of scope is sometimes the main thing to think about with scope is one's own time. So if there's a way of collaborating with people and it's cost effective, then it can be, okay, well, I'll bring someone else in and they can do something. But even there, it can be dicey, because then you have to manage the other person. But if you find a really good collaborator, then all things being equal, you can increase the scope of what can be done in a given amount of time. But just taking Human Flourishing Project, this is something that could take every hour of my week, depending on how I scoped it. And so in terms of avoiding overwhelm, I need to be really clear on what the scope is so that I can do it and that it's enjoyable and it's achieving what I wanted to achieve, versus just being this unbounded thing where I feel like, oh, I need to do more, I need to do more, I need to do more. Most recently for me, this issue of scope came up in my project I mentioned earlier, energytalkingpoints.com, where I'm trying to give really good messaging on energy from a pro-freedom perspective, primarily to different political candidates. And the reason the scope came up is, if you just think about, okay, I'm creating messaging that's trying to influence debates in an election. Now, that is a huge thing. That is, I could spend every hour of my week trying to influence the energy discussion in the elections, and I could still have more to do. So what I was finding was I was experiencing overwhelm in this particular area, and I realized, it's because I have not scoped the project carefully. I've just had it open-ended as, well, I want to influence as much as I can. And then I think, okay, well, I can always do more. I can always do more. I can always do more. And then it just feels like, I always need to be doing more. I'm not sure when I've accomplished it. I'm not sure how much time to spend on it. Versus if I say, okay, the primary thing I want to make sure is that this is quality messaging. So I get feedback from candidates that this is useful. I say useful is the more relevant thing I want from candidates, not so much what they think of the quality. That's an aspect of it being useful, but I want it to be quality from my perspective, useful from their perspective. And then I want to make sure that I give the opportunity for any plausible, let's say, congressional or Senate candidate to have this message. So I want to put it in front of them, and where possible, I want to verify that they're using it. But the core of it is I want to create this content, and I want to make sure I put it in front of these people. That's much more of a limited, of a scoped goal than, I just want to influence as much as possible. Now I can expand that, and I can think of other things I want to add to that. I'm not saying those are the only elements of the goal, but having it scoped that way allows me to time block it and say, okay, I'm going to spend X hours a day on this, and here's what I'm trying to achieve. And then I can be at peace with that, and I can be on top of it. And then sometimes with these things, it'll be, okay, well, I'm falling behind what I set my schedule as. And then I can vary different variables or toggle different variables. So I can say, okay, well, I'm going to change the date on it. With an election project, you can't really do that. But it can also be, I can do that on a book, which I have done numerous times. Or it can be, I'm going to change the scope of this. But there's still a broad idea that, okay, well, I'm only spending so much time on work. I'm only doing so many projects. And so a lot of the action of not being overwhelmed is properly scoping and rescoping the projects. And when all of these things are working well, life has just a very, very different character, because it really feels like, oh yeah, I'm on top of things. And it's true. Oh, I'm on top of things. I'm not overcommitted. I don't have this feeling like I need to be doing way more than I'm doing and way more than I could possibly be doing. I feel like, oh, I'm doing the right things and I'm making daily progress, and that's good. One final perspective on overwhelm that I find helpful is think about where we are as a species. And I've been thinking about this a lot in connection with the next version of Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. The fate of our species was often in the past that we were just totally consumed by the need to acquire the crudest necessities of life. So we just, to acquire any kind of sufficient food and any kind of decent water, and to build any kind of decent protection against climate, which is always dangerous, as I talk about, and different kinds of predators. That was a huge, it was just an often overwhelming percentage of time. And then often you couldn't even be successful. So in the past, there was a reason of sorts to be overwhelmed by life, because we were just not very productive. And so we just couldn't produce enough and well enough to be on top of life. But now, in terms of the ability to produce the basic necessities of life, we're just incredibly good at that. I mean, most of us can do that in a very small amount of time, particularly if you recognize what the barest necessities are. I think a lot about when I was in college and I ran out of money on my meal plan and I didn't want to ask my parents for more money. I would subsist on lentils and tuna, and it probably cost about $25 a week, maybe even less. And so let's say the average person in the US earns more than $25 an hour. So average person can earn enough to meet all of their different food needs in an hour. I mean, now it's not the ideal, maybe, but it's better than most people had 200 years ago. And you just think about, wow, that is an amazing state of affairs. And the reason I highlight this is there's this question of, why take on too much? Why set myself up that I'm always feeling like I'm not doing enough? That's not something we need to do. So it undercuts everything. Now this is different. I distinguish this from ambition. I think ambition and being on top of life are very compatible. I mean, ambition can mean, I have a lot of things that I haven't done that I really want to do. I think overwhelm isn't usually that feeling. Like you think about, I'm in an amusement park and I have 8 hours and I think, I don't know if I can fit all the rides and I want to fit in as much as possible. Okay, you're not really feeling overwhelmed. It's exciting to have those opportunities. And that's more the way one wants to feel about work, is that, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this. And what that really means is, okay, well, I better really focus and pick the projects that I really want to do. And I want to scope it to the level that I really want to do them, because I do have a lot more. And you can say, even time block wise, there's so much exciting work I want to do that I'll apportion 70 hours a week to do work. That's a totally legitimate thing, but it should be out of excitement that, I can spend my time this way and do this stuff. Not, there's all this stuff that I have to do, often because I've committed to it without thinking through it clearly. And so then I'm just feeling bad. If you're going to be working 70 hours a week, then it should be even more so, I'm on top of this. I'm getting so much done. This is a cool experience. So again, avoiding overwhelm, time blocking our work. So deciding how much time we're spending on work, period, choosing the projects that are going to fill that time block carefully. And the thing I've emphasized the most today is scoping the projects carefully. And if we can do all three of those things, we are much, much closer to being on top of life. All right, that is today's episode. Hope you enjoyed it. As always, if you have any questions, comments, love mail, or hate mail, you can email me at alex@alexepstein.com. To participate in the discussion on Facebook, go to facebook.com/Human Flourishing Project. And for bi-weekly updates when new episodes come out, go to humanflourishingproject.com and sign up on the mailing list. Okay, wishing you a next 2 weeks of less overwhelm and more being on top of life. Until next time, I'm Alex Epstein. This has been the Human Flourishing Project.